It appears muting the candidates worked, or were they just sticking to the script? Either way, it was an entirely different debate. Hello tonight, I'm Ken Bastida.
And I'm Elizabeth Cook. Our team coverage begins with CBS reporter Skylar Henry in Nashville for us tonight.
Ken, Liz, good evening to you. Well, tonight, a much more measured approach from both President Trump and Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, as the two men traded barbs over several hot-button topics like the response to the coronavirus, as well as allegations over controversial foreign interests.
President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden squared off for their final debate before Election Day. The president defended his handling of the pandemic.
We closed up the greatest economy in the world in order to fight this horrible disease that came from China. We have a vaccine that's coming. It's ready. It's going to be announced within weeks.
220,000 Americans dead. If you hear nothing else I say tonight, hear this. Anyone who's responsible for that many deaths should not remain as President of the United States of America.
The candidates addressed the topic of interference in the election from overseas.
They will pay a price if I'm elected. They're interfering with American sovereignty.
Nobody tougher than me on Russia. Between the sanctions,
Biden responded to President Trump's claims about the international business dealings of Biden and his son Hunter.
Everybody investigated that. No one said anything he did was wrong in Ukraine.
all of the emails, the horrible emails of the kind of money that you were raking in, you and your family. And Joe, you were vice president when some of this was happening.
Even before tonight's debate, about 47 million Americans have already voted, ahead of Election Day, which is just 12 days away.
You know who I am. You know who he is. You know his character. You know my character. You know our reputations for honor and telling the truth. I am anxious to have this race.
You know, Joe, I ran because of you. I ran because of Barack Obama, because you did a poor job. If I thought you did a good job, I would have never run.
They discussed the future of health care.
I'd like to terminate Obamacare, come up with a brand new, beautiful health care.
What I'm going to do is pass Obamacare with a public option.
Polls show there are far fewer undecided voters now than 2016, when President Trump was elected.
With this final debate wrapped up, the candidates will now focus on key battleground states as the campaigns hit their final stretches. We're here in Nashville. I'm Skylar Henry, KPIX 5.
Well, here in the Bay Area, some of you attended socially distant watch parties.
And at one East Bay watch party, there was one thing people on both sides of the aisle could agree on. KPIX 5's Julia Goodrich spoke to voters in Pleasanton tonight to get their reactions. Julia?
They were watching this debate, and yes, if there is one thing that this divided group of Trump and Biden supporters can agree upon, it's that this debate was more civil and had more substance. But that's about all they could agree on.
Parents were ripped, their kids were ripped from their arms.
The final debate.
We just want people to tune in and listen to the message.
And that they did. This crowd was hungry for substance.
Well, I think they're both doing pretty good. And I like the idea that they tamed it down. They can't interrupt one another. I like that.
I'm trying to confirm what I hear and read because I've been, I'm a real political junkie.
But this debate wasn't a deal breaker. Many already had their minds made up.
I voted for Biden.
I'm a Trump follower. I'm a Trump follower.
And the reasons varied for this Biden supporter.
One of them has character and the other one doesn't have character.
But this Trump supporter clearly disagrees.
The big man himself, Joe, they're setting aside $10 million for him. He's the phoniest candidate we've ever had for the presidency of the United States. I'm finished.
Thank you, Trump 2020, 4 more years.
Before the debate, a different scene. Tensions mounting on opposing street corners.
They try to antagonize us.
Try to catch license plates of people that throw things at my head, spit in my face.
Trump supporters on one corner.
He loves this country, and he loves every one of us, even the people that don't agree with him. He just wants this country to prosper.
Biden supporters on the other.
He is a decent man, and he cares about people, and Trump just doesn't. Trump cares about himself, and it's time for him to go.
I have no idea who's winning. It seems like they're not really answering the questions as much as they just want to argue with each other.
Yeah, and according to who won this debate, the big question, well, according to this group, that's debatable. In the East Bay, Juliette Goodrich, KPIX 5.
It's all debatable. All right, Juliette, thank you.
Well, here in the Bay Area, San Francisco's first drive-in debate watch party was hosted right at Fort Mason. It was put on by Manny's Restaurant and Bookshop, which was known to host events and political watch parties before the pandemic. The debate was projected onto a big screen, usually used for drive-in movies. And we talked to voters who were there tonight.
The debate this round has been a lot better than the debate previously. I personally think Biden's been doing really well without being interrupted, especially, and I think that his points have been coming through really strongly.
I think that the ability for him to actually speak and share his thoughts, he's done a really impressive job as opposed to previous debates where he hasn't really had the opportunity to share his own perspective.
Right now, we want to check in with KPIX 5 political analyst Melissa Kane. Melissa, it seemed like this time around that we got to hear from the candidates. They weren't talking over each other. It seems like just the threat of the mute button was enough to shut them up on the other side and let the other guy finish his thought. What do you think?
That's true. It seemed really helpful that there was the mute button out there. Now, the moderator did a great job under any circumstances, but having that stick sort of behind her, ready for someone, a sort of third party to use it during the debate, seemed to actually keep things in line. Biden seemed like he had a lot more actual plans for the future. He's a lot more detailed in some of his future planning. President Trump not as willing to go out on a limb and talk about what he's going to do in the next 4 years. Well, it also seemed like that when Biden would talk about his plans, it sort of opened the door for the president to just say, why didn't you do it when you were in the Senate for so long and as vice president? I was watching Frank Luntz, the CBS pollster. He conducted a focus group of undecided voters. There are some, he found them. And I was watching them, and here's what they had to say. They said, by and large, that Joe Biden was vague, and they were actually looking for more specifics from him about what he would do in the future, and that the president's restrained, maybe necessarily so, restrained performance tonight actually made it look more presidential. And so I think if there's any movement in the polls that's meaningful, it may actually be toward President Trump. President Trump was very effective in remaining the sort of outsider, if that's possible, after being president for 4 years, the non-politician. And I thought he was effective in sort of keeping up that persona, whether it's accurate or not. And to your earlier point, would go back to Vice President Biden and say, hey, you were here for 8 years. Why didn't you do something? That's true. And there were a lot of zingers out there tonight. I mean, both sides sort of had stumbles where Biden referred to the Proud Boys as the poor boys, and then of course, sandwiches showed up all over Twitter. And President Trump said that he was, that aside from Abraham Lincoln, he had done more for Black people than any other president in history. KPIX 5 political analyst Melissa Kane, thank you for your time.
Meanwhile, President Trump is in a dust-up with CBS News correspondent Lesley Stahl after a confrontational interview for Sunday's segment on 60 Minutes. In an unprecedented move, the White House released the interview ahead of Sunday's show. It was Stahl's third interview with the president and included some tense moments. 60 Minutes released its own excerpts.
The biggest scandal was when they spied on my campaign. They spied on my campaign.
Well, there's no real evidence of that.
Of course there is.
No.
It's all over the place. Leslie,
Sir,
they spied on my campaign and they got caught.
Can I say something? You know, this is 60 Minutes, and we can't put on things we can't verify.
Well, some media experts call the president's decision to release the video a form of distraction and an attempt to bully journalists. CBS News released a statement saying in part, quote, the White House's unprecedented decision to disregard their agreement with CBS News and release their footage will not deter 60 Minutes from providing its full, fair, and contextual reporting, which presidents have participated in for decades. 60 Minutes says the interview with President Trump and another interview with former President Joe Biden Vice President Joe Biden will air as planned this Sunday.